policymakers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, President Trump and top congressional leaders are set to meet to discuss a short-term spending bill to avoid a government shutdown. While Democrats are insisting on health care provisions, Republicans want to address those issues later.
And what the Democrats have done here is take the federal government as a hostage, and for that matter, by extension, the American people, to try and get a whole laundry list of things that they want, that special interest groups on the far left are pushing them to accomplish.
It's up to them. If they come into the meeting to seriously negotiate, and the reason we've been pushing for months, we've been resolute that we need a meeting, that we need a real negotiation, that you don't do this by one party putting together a completely partisan bill and saying take it or leave it. So they felt the heat. The president at first said no. Remember, he first said yes for a meeting, then he said no for a meeting. He went on a rant against Democrats. But I think they felt the heat, and they now want to sit down. But
now, for more on all of this, let's talk to Susan Lynch. Suzanne, the bill must pass before October 1st to avoid a shutdown. Donald Trump has threatened mass firings of federal workers. So what happens next?
Well, I think this meeting this afternoon taking place in the White House is critical. It's obviously taking place 48 hours before the expiration, the deadline at midnight on Tuesday. And in one sense, it's a positive sign that Donald Trump is meeting with these four congressional leaders from the two parties. But it's very unclear whether Donald Trump and the Republican side are willing to make concessions. The Democratic leaders want provisions on health care. That's what they're concerned about here. They're concerned about cuts to Medicaid and also the expiration of Obamacare tax cuts, tax arrangements that are due to expire soon, and that will impact purchasers of health care. They know that this is a big issue for their constituents. They know that health care is something that could mobilise their own supporters ahead of those midterm elections. So signs are that they're digging in on this issue.
Suzanne, what can we then expect from the talks?
Well, I think the key issue is whether Democrats are willing to back down from their demands that these healthcare provisions are included in this bill. And of course, this bill is itself a temporary measure. The Republicans are saying the healthcare concerns have to wait for later. But the Democrats do have some cards to play here, because in the Senate, the Republican Party, who are obviously in the majority there, do need 7 Democrat votes to get this past the 60. So I think the Democrats sense here that they've got leverage politically, particularly in the Senate. And we heard from the Senate Minority Leader there, Chuck Schumer, on this. And he believes that, Donald Trump and the Republicans, as he put it, are feeling the heat on this issue. Now, of course, the question is, will there be much heat in the room today? We have seen, people might remember those scenes where we saw Donald Trump when he hosted congressional leaders in the first administration, those heated discussions, for example, with the then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So there's going to be a lot of focus today on how that meeting goes, both in terms of tone, in terms of that relationship between the two parties, but also, of course, in terms of substance.
Suzanne, thank you so much. Suzanne Lynch there, of course, from Brussels. Now, Moldova's ruling pro-European party is on track to win re-election, keeping the country on the path to EU membership and raising the risk of an escalation in tensions with Russia. We're now joined by Alex Korchakov, geoeconomics analyst for Russia, Eastern Europe and Central Asia at Bloomberg Economics. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. Now, the result, of course, is going to be a blow to Moscow. Can we expect some kind of response?
Yes, we definitely will expect a response, because Moscow has probably spent quite a considerate amount of money on trying to influence the outcome of this election. So we would expect the regular Russian hybrid playbook, which will include attempts to create protests, and there are some protests planned for later today, which can again turn violent. And this will allow Moscow to accuse the pro-EU government in Moldova of democratic backsliding. But also Russia will be using economic coercion, disinformation, misinformation campaigns against the ruling party, which is probably winning the re-election.
Is there something? I mean, is there something wider in this actually that maybe some of the former satellite countries of Russia now want to be more Western, or is this too soon to know?
Well, Moldova and Ukraine are former Soviet republics, which are officially EU candidate countries. And this is definitely something that Russia doesn't like. Russia really wants to stop the drift of countries which it believes belong to its geopolitical orbit towards Europe, and it wants to stop that. So we've seen this in Moldova, we've seen this in Ukraine with Russia invading Ukraine. And we've seen this in Georgia as well, where Russia used hybrid playbook in order to influence the direction of the country. And Georgia right now is a bit more in a limbo and not really moving towards Europe anymore.
Alex, thank you so much for the terrific briefing. Alex Koksharov there. Now we're joined by Subitha Subramaniam, Head of Investment Strategy at Sarasin and Partners. Subitha, thank you for joining us. I mean, it's all about data. It's the Fed, and then you have some of these geopolitics that actually worry markets. But first on the government shutdown, how does the market look at this?
I think the market is actually looking through it. They're assuming that the Democrats eventually back down. I mean, to be honest, I do not believe that they have a huge amount of leverage or staying power because, if Trump does follow through with his threats to fire, more federal workers, I think that actually works against the Democrats. I mean, to date, we've lost 94,000 federal employees, and an additional 154,000 federal employees have taken the early retirement plan from DOGE. So you're down almost 250,000 federal workers. So I think a further sort of threat to shrink the workforce actually does not necessarily play into the Democrats' hands.
So do you think they'll find a compromise?
I mean, it's very difficult.
How long is a piece of string? I know. It's impossible to know.
I suspect, these shutdowns, they come, they go. I think the reality is you have to look at the negotiating leverage on either party. So I suspect the real battle comes in when the continuing resolution basically runs out and we have a renegotiation at the end of November.
So do you think it's fair to say that actually markets only care about the Fed right now and FOMC and some of the data and largely ignore some of the noise coming from either geopolitics or politics?
I would think so. I think they're really focused on what's happening to the economy. I mean, what's happening within the economy is really hard to decipher. I mean, on one hand, we have sort of a huge amount of sort of reduction in labor demand. At the same time, we have consumer spending really resilient. I mean, last week we got some pretty strong, consumption numbers. We have the GDP numbers, which is basically saying, yes, consumers are telling us they're feeling not very confident, but they're also spending quite happily. So it is a very confused picture, and I think markets are really focused. What is it, that's happening in the economy?
And so, I mean, this week they have a couple of data points, right? They're looking, of course, at, employment, payrolls. Could it actually move the needle on how many cuts you think the Fed will do?
So I think the payrolls are the most important data point looking forward. That and inflation, obviously, the two key parts of the Fed mandate. I think payrolls are really important because Chair Powell said last at the FOMC press conference that break-even rate, so the rate that keeps the unemployment fairly stable, is somewhere between 0 and 50,000. So it actually has come down a lot from the last few years. Now, if you see a negative print on the payrolls, I think there will be concerns that actually we're entering a spiral where consumption can start to weaken. So I think that's what markets will be on watch for. Barring that, I think markets will just try to look through it.
When you look at the labor market, there's a lot of question marks on actually what the immigration crackdown because of ICE mean for employment in the future. I mean, does that kind of skew the dynamics?
Yes. So the immigration crackdowns actually are having a material impact on labor supply. So I think the Peterson Institute and a couple of other government agencies have estimated that actually it could reduce, immigration could reduce, say, from negative 500,000 this year. It could fall by 500,000 or possibly rise by 100,000. So the bars are quite wide, but it basically suggests that, it is not going to be contributing to labor supply. So you're going to have a labor market that's pretty much at standstill. It's a no firing, no hiring economy. And you have AI coming in and businesses are trying to grapple with how to restructure.
Subitha, what can you tell us about tariffs? So if you look at, the tariffs and you see businesses looking to restructure because of AI not having the right workforce or different workforce, I mean, it's a lot for a CEO actually to try and contend with and juggle.
Yes, I think the tariffs Gosh, I mean, I think from a strategic perspective, I think the administration is now looking at tariffs as a really key way to address fiscal sustainability. Yeah. It's, at an annualized pace, the government's now taking in about $375 billion. At an annualized pace every month. So that actually is significant, and it allows the administration to restructure, public finances. So I do not believe that they ever go down again. Right. The risk for businesses is that the government is very comfortable with using tariffs over and over again as a repeated tool, as we saw last week with the pharma tariffs, with the tariffs on furniture. So I think the risk is that businesses actually don't know that if this is a stable equilibrium, that's great. They can then reoptimize. But if they keep coming back to tariffs continuing to be very volatile, it's very difficult to make investment decisions.
So does it mean, Subitha, that actually investment decisions are postponed or just completely stopped until they understand the situation a bit better?
So it looks like, if you look at the GDP data, I think businesses are sort of stopping, they are definitely pulling back on some investment decisions. But the one investment decision they're not pulling back is their investment in AI. So, you saw in the GDP numbers, the, investment spending on intellectual property products rose by almost 14% over the quarter at an annualized pace. That's really large. And that's even before all the announcements we got last week from NVIDIA, OpenAI, and the Oracle deal. So I think there is definitely sort of a race to build out the new data infrastructure, and I think there's no hesitation on that account.
Now, how does that change the economy, and actually is the Fed able to measure that correctly?
So, I mean, if you look at the Fed forecast, they're basically assuming nothing from the AI shift, because I think it's really hard because there's no sort of proof yet that it's lifting productivity, it's, impacting the labor market. So I think if you look at their forecast, they're projecting the trend rate for the economy to be 1.8%, which is exactly what they projected last year, the year before, and the year before that. So I think they're just being very prudent. But the reality, if you just look at the big shifts that are taking place and the scale of decisions and capital that's currently being deployed, something will shift as we look forward.
Defense, I guess there's a massive shift in defense, and I don't know whether that also recomposes how we look at the economies.
Yes, so I think most economies are really changing sort of the defense, their commitment to defense. I think there's a discussion whether defense spending as a share of GDP will go from 3 to 5%. Mm-hmm. But that is just, a magnitude larger than what it has been in the last, decades. Mm-hmm. So I think we will have a huge amount of restructuring of defense within countries. Yeah. The world is very insecure. Alliances are very flexible. Your allies might be allies for one area, but not another. So I think in this sort of more insecure world, defense spending is going to rise. The biggest issue with defense is just how are we going to pay for it? Because, you have to make a decision between guns and butter with, debt to GDP ratios at about 100% of GDP. So I think that's where the defense sort of pressures will be felt on the fiscal budgets.
Subitha, our Lizzie Burden's about to speak to Rachel Reeves. The complexity for the UK government are not lost on anyone, especially investors. What are you expecting to hear from them today and then in that budget?
I mean, I believe they're really focused on keeping the fiscal rules and adhering to the fiscal rules. And, that really accounts for 0.3% of GDP. So those are marginal. We know that in order to achieve those fiscal rules, either you cut spending or raise taxes. Yeah. We know that this government has really been unsuccessful in cutting their spending. Yeah. So it's really, I think we're going to look at taxes. The bigger picture, which I think the Labour government has really failed to address, is what is the role of the government in the economy? Government spending as a share of GDP today is 45%. Before the pandemic, it was 40%. So we've increased the government's footprint in the economy. The society is aging, and there's no concerted effort to really address the more strategic sort of questions within the economy.
Okay, Subitha, thank you so much for joining us. Subitha Subramaniam, there, head of investment strategy at Sarasin Partners, and of course she stays with us. Coming up, Rachel Reeves, set to deliver a crucial speech at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool later today. We'll speak to the UK Chancellor live. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. The UK Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is set to deliver a key speech to the party faithful later today at Labour's annual conference. Now, she needs to convince concerned colleagues that her economic programme can undermine the populist right opposition without risking her reputation for fiscal prudence. Well, our UK correspondent Lizzie Burden is at the conference in Liverpool with the Chancellor. Hi, Lizzie.
Hi, Francine. Thank you so much. We are joined, as you say, by the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, ahead of her speech later on today. Thanks for making time for Bloomberg TV and Radio, Chancellor. We've heard you say already that the public finances are in a pretty precarious position. So I want to ask you, many Labour MPs really want you to lift the two-child benefit cap, and we hear that includes the Prime Minister. Can we afford to do that?
Well, no one needs to tell me how important child poverty is. I came into the Labour Party because I wanted children from all backgrounds to have a good start in life. And we've already made strides in reducing child poverty in this Parliament. We're rolling out free breakfast clubs at all primary schools, extending free school meals to an additional 500,000 children. We've capped the cost of school uniform. And we've increased the national living wage and national minimum wage. Would I like to do more? Yes, but of course we haven't always got to explain how policies will be paid for. Yeah. We've got the report from the Child Poverty Task Force later this year, and we'll respond to that. But it is important for all families that the numbers add up, and that's always what I've done as Chancellor of the Exchequer.
And that's been a really strong message from you throughout. Does your party, though, understand how important it is to make the numbers add up, stand on the right side of the bond market?
We campaigned at the election on economic stability, fiscal responsibility, and we did that for a reason, because it was ordinary working people and businesses who paid the price for the economic mismanagement in the last Parliament, when interest rates went through the roof, when inflation got out of control, when pensions were put in peril. And because of that, my party, the Labour Party, accepted the crucial importance of economic discipline to support working families. It's not intention, economic responsibility, to our commitments to make people better off. It is part of that commitment, because those 5 cuts in interest rates, as you know, by the Bank of England, but they've only been possible because of that stability we've returned to the economy.
But look, on winter fuel payments, on pay rises for doctors, on welfare reforms, you've seemed to give, but when are you going to take away? When are you going to choose the bond market over the left of your party?
Well, if you look today at my conference speech, I'll be setting out a youth guarantee, because at the moment we've got 1 million young people who are not in education, employment or training. That's 1 in 8 young people. I'm not going to let that stand. It is a waste of their talent and potential, but it's also a huge waste for business and a huge waste for taxpayers that we are subsidising young people to be out of work when we want them to be in training or in paid employment. And that's one example of how we're reforming the welfare state to get the costs down and at the same time bringing more people into work.
What would you do about it if someone said they don't want to work in the care home?
Well, that's not acceptable. You know, like, welfare is not an alternative to work. The welfare state is there if you need it. You can't say, oh no, actually I'd rather remain on benefits and take that job opportunity. And that's a really important part of what I'm setting out today. It builds on what the previous Labour government did under Tony Blair with the New Deal for young people, that said there was not an option just to stay on benefits, and that's the same with me as Chancellor.
OK, look, I don't expect you to preempt your budget with me, Chancellor, but you did promise business that there'd be no more borrowing and no more tax rises. Is that still true?
Well, what I did last year at the budget was draw a line under the economic and fiscal mismanagement of the previous government, and that did require difficult decisions on taxes.
So there won't be more of them?
Well, I think all of your viewers can see that the last year has brought its fair share of global challenges. The global cost of borrowing, the tariffs from the United States, the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, the disruptions to supply chains, Russia's intensified aggression. I'm Chancellor in the world as it is, not as the world as I might wish it to be. And I had to respond to those. But those fiscal rules that we set out in the election to pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts, to get debt down as a share of GDP, to get the deficit down this year, those commitments stand. And I'm also determined to bring down inflation further, because I recognise that inflation at 3.8% is still too high.
So
that is a global challenge as well, but we get that down.
Those commitments stand. You say the manifesto stands. In the manifesto you said will not increase national insurance, the basic hire or additional rates of income tax or VAT. Yes or no, does that still hold?
Yes, it does. And we also made that commitment around corporation tax as well. And those commitments stand. And they stand for a reason, because working people paid a heavy price in the last Parliament. It was the worst Parliament on record for living standards. It's still the biggest challenge for working people. So those commitments stand. But what I want your viewers to know, that my commitments to economic stability, to fiscal responsibility and to those fiscal rules, they absolutely stand, because they are the bedrock of stability, and only with stability can we grow the economy.
So we need to know where you're going to find the money from. The French are in a similar fiscal bind. They're seemingly on the brink of a wealth tax. Is it time for a mansion tax here in the UK?
I would like to differentiate ourselves from what's happening in other countries around the world.
Well, wheels are higher here.
Yes, but they have struggled to get a budget through. And we successfully got the budget through last year and the spending review. And many people said that wouldn't be possible because we had to make difficult decisions. But I'm up for difficult decisions when they are in the national interest, and I will continue to take them. We already tax wealth in Britain with capital gains tax, with inheritance tax. The budget last year, as you know, we got rid of the non-domicile status in the tax system. We put VAT on the school fees. We increased taxes on private jets. We already have taxes on wealthy people in Britain. I don't think we need a standalone wealth tax. And in fact, countries that do have that don't have those other taxes. So I'm not even sure it would work.
OK, and there's been growing concern in the city as well that you could target the banking sector for higher taxes.
I think we probably shouldn't go through every single possible...
What's your message to the city?
Well, I think that from both of my Mansion House speeches, the city know how much I value the contribution that they make, both through direct employment and investment, but also supporting the wider economy with an efficient allocation of capital. And the regulatory reforms that I brought in at Chancellor are all about promoting growth and job creation and businesses coming to Britain in financial services.
Chancellor, you've also already said that you would be open to just having one OBR forecast per year. You accused Liz Truss, right here on Bloomberg TV, of sidelining the OBR. How is this different?
Well, the International Monetary Fund have said that there should be one fiscal event a year, and I committed to that in the manifesto and have done since. I think that their recommendation is a sensible one. That will have to mean changes in the second forecast, but that's not about reducing transparency. That is about better economic policy making, so we're not having to change policy and giving that uncertainty every 6 months for businesses.
Okay. Just finally, how much worse do the polls need to get for you to accept that we need to replace Keir Starmer?
Keir Starmer got elected with a massive mandate last year. If someone had said 15 months ago that we would be the fastest growing economy in the G7, we'd have 5 cuts in interest rates, we would have done trade deals with the US, India and the EU, that wages would have risen faster in the first 10 months of this Labour government than the first 10 years of the previous Conservative government, I think most people would have said, I don't think so, Rachel. We've achieved those things with Keir as Prime Minister, and we'll get on and continue the job.
Chancellor, thank you so much for taking time for Bloomberg TV and radio. We always appreciate. Good luck for your speech later. Francine, back to you.
Lizzie, great interview with the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. Coming up, China's industrial profits surged after months of declines. That's according to data released over the weekend. We speak with George Magnus from Oxford University's China Centre next. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. With less than 48 hours to a potential U.S. shutdown, President Trump will meet top congressional leaders in a bid to secure a short-term funding bill. The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says his government is in a battle for the nation's soul as Nigel Farage's reform looms large at the Labour Party conference. Plus, Moldova's ruling pro-European party is on track to win re-election, keeping the country on the path to EU membership and raising the risk of escalation with Russia. Now, official data shows Chinese industrial profits have surged after months of declines. Well, it's a signal that the government's campaign to tackle overcapacity and excessive competition in the economy is bearing fruit. Subdued domestic demand and uncertainty around U.S. tariffs, though, leaves the outlook for profits at Chinese companies clouded. Well, joining us now is George Magnus, Research Associate at Oxford University's China Centre. George, I'm so happy to see you. It's been way too long. It's great to catch up, and a lot has happened trend actually in China over the last couple of quarters and years. Like, what do we most misunderstand about what Chinese corporates are doing right now?
Well, I think, in some respects, I think when you say what we misunderstand, I think the market, I think, has kind of had a reappraisal about this year. Obviously, the Chinese stock market has done pretty good. From a very poor start, as it were, from the last couple of years. And this kind of reassessment of China's technology role and its kind of pecking order in terms of sort of the AI league. So, things that you would normally look for, like consumer discretionary and communication services, IT. I think there has been a bit of a reassessment. So that's the good news. The bad news is I think that people don't really understand yet. And I think certainly it's a little bit kind of complicated for day-to-day market kind of observations. But people don't really understand that Chinese industrial policy is probably the biggest macro phenomenon that the world economy faces right now. Is much more important than Donald Trump's tariffs. And I think the full implication of that, I think, is not really sunk in yet, actually.
Yeah, so, George, fundamentally, this is going up the value chain, right? Do they need to do 30% in terms of offerings to make this a success?
What I'm trying to suggest here is that the full consequences. I mean, your lead story was about the recovery industrial profits, which was true. There were some pretty savage year-on-year comparisons, which helped to flatter the latest August numbers. But I think that the underlying position for profitability in the Chinese corporate sector, plus all of the things that we've become very familiar with, like overcapacity and deflation, and this whole kind of involution campaign or competition campaign, which the government has announced, I think are serious problems. Really, they're going to continue to dog China for quite a long time to come.
I mean, what's the China consumer looking like right now?
Not great, right? I mean, they've had this 3 billion renminbi program that they announced for this year for trade-in, subsidies basically for consumer goods trade-ins. And there have been, sort of incremental changes in pension payments and childcare allowances and so on and so forth. So these are all sort of incrementally kind of helpful, but they don't really change the underlying sort of passivity, really, about the consumption story in China as far as big ticket items are concerned. So, airports, railway stations, restaurants are pretty full, but the big sort of discretionary items in terms of consumption are still not great. Income growth is not what it should be. And the whole kind of structure of macroeconomic policy making in China is complicated by the fact that the government is wedded to something that is not very consumer friendly.
George, I mean, is there really in the race to dominate global AI between the U.S. and China? How advanced is China?
Pretty good. I mean, obviously, everybody knows DeepSeek now. It was a company that was founded by a hedge fund proprietor and only like 2 years ago. And DeepSeek isn't alone. So in terms of the sort of large language model, scaling up, producing at low cost and so on. I mean, China's pretty good at this and catching up. I mean, I think in terms of the AI infrastructure, that people look at and say, well, where is the potential in the future? Obviously, there is still a case to answer for China. And then there's the whole issue about semiconductors and whether China's do-it-yourself kind of program really is going to be up to scratch. It's a pretty tough competition.
George, I mean, overall, given what you've beautifully explained on kind of some of the pressures on the Chinese economy and China corporates, what do you think we'll see from China in the next quarters?
In the next quarters? Well, I think, the July-August numbers that we've had for fixed asset investment were really, really disappointing. The good news is that, in a way, is that everything got hit. So not just real estate, but also manufacturing and infrastructure. And I suspect that means that there wasn't really a fundamental reason for it, and that it was much more related to the combination of heat wave and flooding and sort of inclement weather and so on. So I suspect that in the next couple of quarters we'll see a bit of a kind of a bounce back in asset investment, fixed investment. But fundamentally, you know, the problem, particularly as the Chinese government is preparing to launch its 15th five-year plan, which is going to be rubber-stamped really at the fourth plenum, which is going to happen next month. I think that the fundamentals of the Chinese economy are kind of they're quite equivocal. On the one hand, you've got a dynamic modern sector that's, you know, the envy of the world, advanced manufacturing, etc., etc. You know, on the other hand, you've got kind of 78, 75, 80% of the economy which actually is really quite languishing, and not really responsive, really, because the government policy isn't geared towards helping it.
But I mean, I'm quite taken by the idea that actually we don't really know, or that there's this huge imbalance, and we're not really realizing how big of a shift China could bring to the rest of the world. I mean, is this only on the negative side, or could it actually give a boost to everyone else? Well,
I mean, it mirrors the sort of dichotomy that I was just kind of referring to, because obviously, you know, to the extent, you know, if we want kind of cheap or relatively cheap, you know, goods, electric vehicles and, you know, climate change mitigation, manufacturing equipment for solar and wind and so on and so forth. Clearly, you know, China's the sort of go-to place, and they provide that stuff. And obviously the export push is working really well, even outside of the United States and Europe, where, you know, Chinese exports to so-called global south countries are doing extremely well. But the bad news is that, you know, China's industrial policy, again, you know, I mean, the starting position is China accounts for a third of global manufacturing. If they want to raise that over the next, you know, 3, 4, 5 years to, I don't know, you know, 36%, 40%, 42%, they can only do that if countries like Brazil, even countries like Brazil and India and other countries that are trying to industrialize, are going to be on the losing side. And that includes, of course, you know, US and Europe as well. So, in a way, what Chinese industrial policy is doing is providing the rest of the world with lots of cheap goods that we want, but on the other hand, it's kind of a threat to our own industries, our own economies, our own you know, communities that we think we need to have for you know, resilience and so on and so forth.
Always so smart. George, thank you so much for joining us. George Magnus there, Research Associate at Oxford University China Center. Now, oil is retreating this morning. That's as Bloomberg understands that OPEC Plus is likely to raise output by at least as much as 137,000 barrels a day in November. The group set to continue its strategy to reclaim market share over maintaining prices. And Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet with Donald Trump amid assertions from Washington that a plan to end the war in Gaza is nearly complete.
It's looking like we have a deal on Gaza, and we'll let you know. Mr. President, I think it's a deal that will get the hostages back. It's going to be a deal that will end the war. It's going to be a deal it's going to be peace.
For more, let's bring in our Dan Williams. Dan, what do you expect to come out of the meeting?
I expect we might see a breakthrough, and one should be cautious about this, especially when parsing statements by the US president. He is ebullient. He has made promises over the last few months that have not panned out about imminent breakthroughs in this conflict. However, it's worth remembering that we are now just over a week away from the 2-year mark of a war that's put enormous strains on Israel's resources, that's really laid ruin to much of the Gaza Strip, that has troubled the Middle East and Western powers as it spread to other fronts, affecting shipping, affecting energy, plunging Israel into an international isolation, the likes of which it hasn't seen in many years. So the vectors would seem to indicate that all parties are interested in ending this, and Trump may be able to wield enough authority and clout, specifically over Muslim or Arab countries that have themselves clout over Hamas, specifically Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, to bring Hamas to agree to this deal. We don't know the details of the deal yet, but from what's been leaked, it would suggest that it has enough points, 21 points, according to the Trump administration, to to satisfy everyone or disappoint everyone in equal measure.
So, Dan, the talks come as Israel intensifies its offensive on Gaza City. What do we know? There's been huge outcries from many countries.
Well, I think Israel would say that it's thanks to that intensification that Hamas may agree. This is a intensification of military pressure. Israeli tanks were spotted at the heart of Gaza City yesterday. This is some 6.5 weeks after the Gaza City operation was approved by Israel. It's pretty clear that operation was slow-tracked. It's not a big city by international standards. We're talking about central Gaza City is about a third the size of Manhattan. It really should not have taken Israeli forces this long to reach the heart of it. So yes, they are working methodically to churn up potential or suspected Hamas infrastructure to drive Hamas fighters into the open where they can be engaged and killed or captured. But also, I think this was intended to signal to Hamas in its de facto capital of the Gaza Strip that it's game over, and that if an offer is brought to the table, specifically this offer, it's time to accept it and surrender and hand over the remaining hostages.
Dan, thank you so much. Dan Williams there with the very latest, of course, on the Middle East. Now, Denmark has banned the use of civilian drones for 5 days next week as it steps up security ahead of an EU summit in Copenhagen. The move is intended to eliminate the risk of confusing civilian-operated aircraft with hostile drones during the meeting. Now, the ban follows a surge of drone incursions across the country in the past week. And Denmark's Genmab has agreed to acquire Mirus, a Dutch drug maker that's developing a treatment for cancer of the head and neck. Genmab will buy Mirus shares at $97 each in a deal valued at about $8 billion. That represents a premium of about 41%, while Mirus shares are surging in pre-market trading. Europe's largest aviation group, Lufthansa, says it'll cut 4,000 administrative jobs by 2030. For more, we're joined by our global aviation managing editor, Benedict Kamel. Benny, run us through the details of this announcement.
So Lufthansa announced this morning. They're holding a capital markets day in Munich. It's the first time, really, they're giving a comprehensive overview of their longer-term goals to investors, and as part of that, they laid out some new financial goals, but they also came out with this number, 4,000 administrative jobs, most of them in Germany, to be cut over a number of years until 2030. So this isn't overnight. It's going to be a gradual process, but really the message here is that Lufthansa knows its costs are too high, particularly at the mainline namesake airline. That's something they have to fix. They've tried it over the years with sort of nip and tuck measures, a bit of tweaking here and a couple of cost cuts there. This is a far more sort of robust approach that they are taking now. Obviously, the blowback from the unions is quite strong. This is a company that still makes money, even though it's not what they'd like it to be in terms of the amount, but still there's going to be a consistent fight over this. And we do have a battle over jobs that's looming. It's the pilots that might go on strike as early as this week, or they will vote to go on strike maybe tomorrow. So that gives you a sense of the battles and the conflicts that are inherent at this company.
Benny, what else can we expect from the capital markets event today?
So, as I said, this is a sort of a more comprehensive layout of where they want to go financially. They've given themselves slightly more ambitious targets in terms of profitability. They've kept their target in terms of the dividend straight. They want to go more into a digital AI kind of industry. AI is obviously a buzzword across the entire corporate world. How far it can really find its way into aviation, that's a big debate. Some airlines are trying out AI to improve the ticketing pricing. Other airlines are saying we don't want to go there, it's not fair, we want to be transparent. So it'll be interesting to hear from Lufthansa in how far AI and dynamic pricing when it comes to tickets, whether that's something they will want to look at. And really, looking at where does this company go from here? It's a company that's grown with acquisitions. They most recently bought a big chunk of ITA, the Italian airline. They have operations in Switzerland, in Austria. in Belgium, and really how do you stitch it all together and keep it together as you have growing international conflicts, the routes to China, that's weakening, the transatlantic market, that is showing signs of weakness, particularly going to the US. More and more people are hesitant to go there. So those are a lot of the debates that are looming, and as I said, the pilot strike is probably first and foremost the one they need to fix first.
Benny, thank you so much. As always, Bloomberg's global aviation editor, Benedict Kamel. Coming up, we'll return to Liverpool for an interview with the chief economist at the Institute of Directors as we look ahead to the UK Chancellor's speech from the Labour Party conference. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves is set to deliver a key speech to the party faithful later today at Labour's annual conference. Ahead of the speech, Reeves told Bloomberg she will stick to the UK's fiscal rules. Well, Lizzie Burden joins us again from Liverpool after having interviewed the Chancellor. Hi, Lizzie.
Hi, Francine. Yeah, I'm pleased to say we're joined by Anna Leach, Chief Economist at the Institute of Directors. We can get the business view now on what the Chancellor's already had to say to us this morning. Thanks so much for making time, Anna. We heard Rachel Reeves saying earlier that, yes, she does stand by her manifesto commitments not to raise VAT, income tax or national insurance. So my question to you is, where should she find the money? Does she need to raise other taxes or should there be spending cuts?
Well, ideally, you would be looking at spending restraint because that would be a more growth-friendly policy area.
But the left of the party doesn't like that.
Indeed, that is correct. So if you're going to look at taxes, it becomes really challenging because, of course, the manifesto commitments rule out some 3/4 of the tax base, as we know. You've already hit at the remaining section of the tax base, national insurance for businesses, pretty hard last year. So you end up with a very, very small pot of remaining taxes, or indeed new opportunities for taxes to go after. And the danger with that is the scale of the sums that she potentially needs to raise means that it's quite big raises on quite small numbers of people, which could be quite damaging for growth and behavioural responses.
So are you saying that she does need to pull one of the three main levers of tax and break the manifesto commitment?
I mean, reluctantly, it does seem that it would be better for growth. It would be one of the sort of less bad ways of raising significant sums without damaging incentives for growth too much.
Well, that's really interesting because typically the IOD calls for lower taxes. Yeah. So is the situation that bad that you've changed your mind?
It's more about the practicalities at the moment. We would prefer more spending restraint. You know, as you say, the politics don't make that look likely. It's hard to deliver meaningful reductions within the timescales necessary when you're doing sort of large-scale reform. It's definitely something they should be doing, though. We've already maxed out borrowing. The markets have made that clear. You're only left with taxes. So what we're saying is, like, if you're going to do taxes, do the less bad ones for growth because the markets are judging us for growth.
Well, really interesting. She also said she's not sure a standalone wealth tax would work, as we know they're considering in France. What's your analysis on that?
So everything I've read about it would concur with that conclusion. A new wealth tax, particularly an annual one, would be very expensive administratively. So big cost for HMRC to set up and run because asset valuations are really difficult to do. If you try and just go after the top 1%, they're really difficult to track down. If you go after a larger segment, then you're starting to hit, you know, people on more modest incomes and first houses and things like that. So it becomes quite challenging. If you're looking at a one-off wealth tax, that's more that has to be credibly one-off, and we're not in a crisis, so it's difficult to justify it as a one-off right now.
Okay, so similar to what she said. Yeah. And I want to ask, as the Institute of Directors, is Labour the party of business right now? Was it once the party of business and then they came along with this payroll tax rise for employers, scrap the non-dom regime, stop being the party of business, and then reform comes along and they're back to being the party of business? Do you agree with that narrative?
So we don't comment on the party politics elements, we comment on policies. And Labour have done business-friendly policies. You've got the various long-term strategies. Businesses love policy. stability. They said instability was the biggest impediment to growth when we surveyed them July last year. They might answer differently about the biggest impediments right now. So they are doing some elements, but what's lacking is coherence at the moment. So I like the sort of the tax one, for example. They launched a corporate tax roadmap on the day that they launched a significant unexpected increase in employer NI. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot have tax stability for business and launch an unexpected tax rate. So what we want is something that's a bit more consistent and coherent for business policy and growth.
The way you talk about the importance of stability for business, of course, it would seem that the leadership challenges don't help, therefore. We've got the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, out there saying this government shouldn't be in hock to the bond market. Does that create the instability that you say business hates?
It is a worrying area to get into because it is a bit Liz Truss-esque when you've got quite significant members of the governing leadership talking about how we should be borrowing way more and increasing public spending more, because that is similar but different to Liz Truss, because of course she was big tax reductions rather than big public spending increase. And we already have the highest borrowing costs in the G7 for various reasons, including we've got higher inflation, of course, but people do think there's a risk premium on the UK at the moment because of our weak growth outlook and actually a lack of credibility around our fiscal policy.
And I mean, the reason that there's so much speculation over who should take over from Keir Starmer is because, of course, Labour's languishing in the polls to reform. And I just wonder finally whether there's anything from Nigel Farage's playbook that Rachel Reeves should be borrowing, particularly when it comes to his suggestion that the BOE should stop paying interest on reserves that commercial banks hold with it. Should she do that?
It's a bit extreme what he's proposing. I mean, I think an area which is interesting is the fact that the US Federal Reserve have the treatment of their sort of assets, sort of similar assets and the runoff thereof treated differently in their public finances to the way we do it in ours. So I think that pragmatic reflection on how we're scoring it in our public finances deserves looking at. I don't think his proposals would be particularly helpful right now in the grand scheme of things.
Anna, before I let you go, top thing you want to hear from Rachel Reeves' speech later today?
I think I'm going to be disappointed either way, because you've already kind of ruled it out. I guess I would have liked to have had a bit more softening of language around manifesto commitments, but I don't think that's coming. I do like her constant reaffirmation of the fiscal rules. That's really important. I know she's going to talk about youth employment and so on. That's good.
I think the bond market likes her being wedded to the fiscal rules as well. Yeah. But Anna, thank you so much for making time for us. You've set the bar low. Hopefully we won't be disappointed when it comes to this speech later. Francine, back to you. We've just heard from Anna Leach, the Chief Economist at the Institute of Directors.
Lizzie, thank you. Lizzie Burden in Liverpool. Staying in the UK, the GSK Chief Executive, Emma Walmsley, stepping down after almost 9 years. Now, she'll be succeeded by the British drug maker's Chief Commercial Officer, Luke Mills. He's currently responsible for the company's global medicines and vaccines business. Walmsley's succession will mean the departure of one of the most prominent female chief executives in British business and in the global pharma industry. Now, the change is set to take effect in January. On a programming note, on Wednesday, Bloomberg TV will have live coverage of the Women Money Power event here in London, convening the most influential female voices in finance from around the world. We'll discuss key themes facing the future of business, and GSK's Emma Walmsley, of course, will be amongst the panelists. Up next, Bloomberg Brief. Of course, we'll also have a full roundup of what we can expect from the Fed, look at gold, another record for gold, and then we look at indices across the world. This is Bloomberg.